Hello everyone and welcome to the weird, scary and horrible parts of humanity. Getting off death row in Singapore alive is like getting blood out of stone. Since 1965 only 6 people have had their death sentences commuted by the President of Singapore, with the last case being Mafavakanan Kalimufu, who on the 26th of May 1996, 16 days after turning 18, was arrested for the murder of Saravanan Michael Ramalingam on the 26th of May 1996. His death sentence was commuted by President Ong Teng Cheong on the 28th of April 1998 to life imprisonment. He served 20 years in prison before being released on the 28th of January 2012. So to be released from death row in Singapore, you wouldn't even chew gum, which is illegal in Singapore, you wouldn't jade walk, you wouldn't dare to commit a crime, least of all end up back in prison, and least of all end up back on fucking death row. And yet that's exactly what happened to Roshdi Abdullah Altway. Roshdi bin Abdullah Altway was born in what was the colony of Singapore in 1959, during which time Singapore was a crown colony of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. He had a sister. Not much is known about his early life. He was married but did not have any kids. In the 1980s and 1990s he was a salesman, however the Straits Times would describe him as a businessman. However, at the same time, according to his family, he became a drug addict and was detained under the Criminal Law Act and was then arrested by the Central Narcotics Bureau for selling drugs, with Inspector Rajab Mohamed overseeing his case. At the request of Rajab, Roshdi became an informant, basically a narc, for the Central Narcotics Bureau. Roshdi had been with the Central Narcotics Bureau since the 1st of July 1977, rising from assistant narcotics officer to being in charge of the harbour and railway team. He had a wife and 2 kids, Mohid Arif, born in 1989, and Noor Shahiha, born in 1986. If positive information was given as an informer, Roshdi would make between 1,000 and 2,000 Singaporean dollars. In 1990, the median income in Singapore was $2,296 per month. So, with each bit of positive information given, he stood to make quite a bit of money. However, both fostered a friendship and placed bets against each other at the Singaporean Turf Club, the only horse racing club in Singapore and part of the Malayan Racing Association. Relatives would later tell the new paper that both met quite often. The friendship lasted 3 years before the two would fall out. Between 1990 and 1992, they put bets against each other, and Rajab allegedly borrowed 40,000 Singaporean dollars during this time from Roshdi. Between the 6th and 7th of March 1993, Roshdi lost $4,700 to Rajab, and Rajab asked for Roshdi to repay him. On the night of the 8th of March 1993, Rajab responded to a pager call, it was the 90s, and told his wife Masita Sanoesia, "I'm going to meet an agent," the last words he would say to her, and went to Serangoon North Village Estate, a cluster of housing and development board flats. He stopped by his office and asked 2 of his officers, one of whom was CPL E.Y. Hock Chin, to stand by for a drug bust, and he said that he would make a second call later on. However, this call never came. It turned out that he met Roshdi at his apartment in Serangoon North, and both got into a fight over the debt, with Roshdi strangling Rajab and punching him in the stomach. Allegedly, when Roshdi noted that Rajab was reaching for his bag and presuming that he was going to get his gun, he grabbed a granite chili mortar and bludgeoned him with it multiple times. On the 9th of March, Sanoesia reported her husband missing, and his sister tried to contact a newspaper regarding the disappearance of her brother. Singaporean police found that Roshdi was the informant that he had met based on phone records, and he was arrested on the 10th of March, with Roshdi confessing that he had murdered Rajab. On the night of the 11th of March 1993, Roshdi led police to a multi-storey car park in Tampines, a suburb of Singapore. The decomposing body of Rajab was found in the back of his car. According to Dr. Wee King Po, who performed an autopsy on him. There were multiple skull fractures on his head, and a large amount of force was exerted in inflicting the blows, with his skull crushed by blunt force trauma caused by multiple blows inflicted with a blunt object. He had been dead for at least 2 days. Rajab's gun and ammunition, consisting of 5 or 6 bullets, was found in the flat of Roshdi's mother-in-law in the suburb of Ang Mo Kio. Ultimately, the new paper would sum it up best, stating that Rajab's moonlighting as a bookie and operating as a bookie for the last 3 years led to his death. On the 12th of March 1993, Rajab's wife would tell the media that she did not want to talk about her husband's death, stating, "I have nothing to say. No matter what I say, it won't bring my husband back." Additionally, his niece, Rajab Abdullah Altway, stated to the Straits Times, "It's a terrible thing to happen, especially since Mama is pregnant. The man who did this does not deserve to live." Indeed, at the time of his death, his wife was 3 months pregnant. On the 12th of March, over 200 officers of the Central Narcotics Bureau attended Rajab's funeral, and he was seen as a hard and dedicated worker, with neighbours telling the former Singaporean Chinese-language newspaper Lianair Wanabor that he was a good and caring person. On the 13th of March, Roshdi was charged with murder with no plea taken. On the 15th of November 1993, Roshdi claimed trial to 1 count of murder, 1 count of illegally possessing a revolver, and 1 count of illegally possessing 6 live rounds of ammunition. The prosecution was led by Mathavan Devadas and Chua Jin at the High Court of Singapore, with the trial overseen by Judicial Commissioner Kan Ting Chio. Roshdi claimed that he acted in self-defence and never intended to kill Rajab. He claimed that he wrapped the body with cloth, called his wife to help him carry the body, and left it in the back seat of Rajab's car, abandoning it in the car park in Tampines before hiding the revolver and bullets in his mother-in-law's house. On the 27th of November 1993, Judicial Commissioner Kan Ting Chio delivered his verdict and found him guilty of murder and sentenced him to death. While on death row, Roshdi was called as a witness in the murder trial of his former cellmate, Somperon Chenpakdea, who was charged with murdering fellow Thai construction worker Kulap Nopakun in 1993. Roshdi testified that Somperon was indeed abused and forced to confess to the murder of Kulap during police interrogation. He would eventually be acquitted of murder in 1994. On the 22nd of August 1994, the Court of Appeal in Singapore heard Roshdi's appeal, with the trial overseen by Justice M. Karfigesu, and sorry I couldn't find his first name, Justice Tian Lip Ping and Justice Go Jun Seng. During his appeal, the new paper would state that Roshdi confessed that he wanted to hide Rajab's corpse because it was bleeding prolifically, leading him to impromptu hide the body in the back of his car. It was decided that Roshdi was guilty of culpable homicide, which was akin to manslaughter under Singaporean law, and he was sentenced to 10 years for culpable homicide and 6 years for illegally possessing Rajab's revolver and his bullets, as well as 12 strokes of the cane. His sister-in-law and his aunt told the Straits Times that they were relieved that Roshdi would not be facing the gallows. He was released on parole in 2003. However, this wasn't the last time that he would be in trouble with the law. In 2007, he was arrested for smuggling Subutex tablets and consuming undisclosed drugs. In the same year, he was found guilty of drug consumption and smuggling and sentenced to 12 years in prison and 10 strokes of a cane. He was released in 2016 on parole for good behaviour after completing 2/3 of his jail term. But that still didn't mean that he would go straight. On the 14th of September 2016, he was one of 5 suspected drug offenders arrested by the Central Narcotics Bureau in a joint operation at his flat in Block 209B, Compassvale Lane, with a total of 78.77 grams of diamorphine or pure heroin, with the minimum amount being 15 grams, found in his apartment. This mandated the death penalty under the Misuse of Drugs Act of 1973 in Singapore. The drugs were in bags in a cupboard in his bed and in bags under his bed. Additionally, on him were a set of keys to the apartment, a Nokia mobile phone, a stack of $50 Singaporean notes equating to $4,000, and a blue plastic bag containing a stack of money wrapped in paper equating to 14,000 Singaporean dollars. To put it in perspective, in 2019, the median monthly income for Singaporean males was $4,810 per month. On the 17th of September 2019, his trial was held at the High Court of Singapore, with the trial presided by Justice Valeria Fian. He was represented by Peter Keith Fernando, Rajan Sanjavi and Lee Mei Ling, while the prosecution was represented by Mark Tay, Chan Yi Cheng and Chana Poon. The prosecutor claimed that he aimed to sell and traffic the heroin based on his statements, and that he had repackaged and delivered the drugs on multiple occasions. However, when he testified, he stated that he was only safekeeping the drugs for a man named Agu, full name Chandran Prasanna Anu, who was an Indian national who entered Singapore on the 19th of January 2019 from India and was charged with abetting to commit drug trafficking, having been arrested in connection to Roshdi's case. He was granted a discharge on the 19th of March 2019, which did not amount to a dismissal, and was deported back to India. However, Assistant Superintendent of Police Yang Gongulan, in charge of investigating the involvement of Anu, found that he did not have any involvement in the drug trafficking. Roshdi also insisted that the $18,000 came from selling contraband cigarettes. However, on the 17th of August 2020, Justice Valeria Fian rejected the defence, and it was concluded that Roshdi's professed willingness to lie, coupled with his illogical responses on the stand, went to issues of general credibility and were consistent with my finding that the statements, rather than his version on the stand, were reliable. His version of events were also disputed, with Justice Fian noting that in light of his history and personal circumstances, he would have been very sceptical, wary, and not trusting and unquestioning in holding the heroin. As a result, he was found guilty of trafficking diamorphine under Section 5.1 of the Misuse of Drugs Act and was sentenced to death by hanging. Appealing his sentence, his appeal was heard in August 2021 at the Court of Appeal by Chief Justice Sundaresh Menon, Senior Judge Chao Hik Tin, and 3 judges of appeal, Judith Prakash, Stephen Chong and Andrew Pung. Roshdi argued that the trial court was wrong to reject his defence, and that the prosecution did not fulfill additional disclosure obligations by disclosing that statements of Agu at a late stage during the proceedings, and his lawyers argued that his statements should not have been admitted at trial as he did not make them voluntarily. Represented by Andrea Darius Jumaboy, it was argued that he should not have been presumed as possessing the heroin for the purpose of trafficking when he was just safekeeping it, and he planned on returning it to Aru. Deputy Attorney General Hri Kumar Nair represented the prosecution. On the 11th of November 2021, the 5 judges of the Court of Appeal upheld his death sentence. In December 2023, while on death row, Roshdi and 35 other death row inmates filed a constitutional challenge to oppose the newly enacted Post-Appeal Applications in Capital Cases Act, which was implemented to monitor the law minute appeals made by death row convicts who had used up all avenues of appeal. They argued that the new law was discriminatory against death row inmates, would hinder the last chances of the convicts' access to justice, and violated the need for fairness during the legal proceedings. This was dismissed at the High Court of Singapore by Justice Hu Xiao Peng. A follow-up appeal was dismissed by the Court of Appeal on the 27th of March 2024. On the 9th of March 2024, they all appealed to the High Court, arguing that the policy of the Legal Assistance Scheme for Capital Offences was not to assign counsel for death row inmates who filed further legal motions after exhausting their avenues of appeal against capital punishment and conviction, and this infringed the need to uphold fairness of court processes and constitutional rights of the prisoners, as well as breaching their access to justice and the right to legal representation. However, 11 days later, Justice Dedar Singh dismissed the motion. On the 3rd of April 2025, Roshdi received his death warrant, noting that his death sentence was to be carried out 1 week later. On the 10th of April 2025, Roshdi appealed and sought to delay his execution, but his lack of success with the Singaporean judicial system continued, and Justice Belinda Ang rejected his appeal. In a final-ditch attempt to save his life, he appealed to the President of Singapore, Tharman Shanmugaratnam, which was also dismissed. He was hanged on the 10th of April 2025, having previously escaped the gallows at Changi Prison, becoming the 669th prison executed in the history of Singapore since 1915. He was aged 65. His execution was condemned by the European Union, with the delegation of the European Union to Singapore condemning the death penalty and calling for a moratorium on death sentences and abolishment of the death penalty in Singapore. However, on the same day, the Central Narcotics Bureau defended his execution, stating the capital punishment in Singapore is only used on the most serious crimes, and the significant quantity of heroin that Roshdi had on him would have done harm not just to drug users, but to their families and, in turn, wider Singaporean society. Thank you for watching. Please do yourself a favour and hit that subscribe button and the bell icon to be notified of when new videos come out. Also, why not hit that like button and leave a nice comment? It helps more than you know, and your support is truly appreciated. Until next time, stay awesome, stay classy, be kind to everyone you meet, have an amazing day, and remember, the truth is always more interesting than fiction.